The first step to curbing methane emissions is finding them. As greenhouse gases go, methane is a bad one. Over a 20-year period, it is 80 times more potent at warming than carbon dioxide. It's also invisible to the naked eye, which makes finding where methane is leaking into our atmosphere particularly challenging. But let's imagine you could see it. Let's imagine you could get up high enough, all the way to space, and look back on Earth with the right kind of sensor, one that can actually see methane. Then you could start spotting and fixing those big leaks, and you could start reducing the major impacts that methane is having on our climate. That's where GHGSat comes in. GHGSat has pioneered the use of satellites for monitoring greenhouse gas emissions in high resolution from orbit. Using a sensor that can detect methane down to a 25-meter radius, they can spot the sort of large methane plumes that can come from landfills, oil and gas facilities, coal mines, feedlots, pipelines, and many other industrial operations. It's powerful data for reducing our emissions. But compared with the handheld infrared cameras that are used to detect methane right now, orbital methane sensing is one giant leap for mankind. So we sat down with Stanley Opara, solution architect with GHGSat, to discuss the challenges of methane emissions, spotting leaks at truly global scale, and the challenges of putting bleeding-edge tech in space. On this episode of Carbon Copy.
My name is Stanley Opara, and I'm a solutions architect at GHGSat. So I basically work with our Chief Revenue Officer and the go-to-market team to curate methane emission solutions for customers around the world. So one instance would be, say we have new regulations. So it would be me helping customers understand what the implication of those regulations are on their business, and also helping the team understand how to unpack those regulations for customers. And you could also have an instance where a customer needs to understand technology suite. What technologies do they need to address their decarbonization journey? I help them understand, okay, you might need to use satellite, you might need to use ground-based solutions. So that's the role I hold at GHGSat.
Great. Well, thanks, Stanley. So with that, I think we'll dive in a little bit more detail in our discussion. And where I wanted to start is just, methane satellites in space. Sounds really, really cool, but what's the next level down from that? How do you explain your technology to people that are unfamiliar with methane detection, with the satellite industry, and generally unfamiliar with your company?
This is how I like to explain it. I know lots of us have been to the bank and handed the cashier some banknotes, right? And then they get these very fancy blue lights to check for the security features on the notes just to make sure that the notes are genuine, right? So under the naked eyes, we can't really see these security features, but under certain conditions, we can. That's exactly what our technology does. So we have these sensors which can detect methane fingerprints as they are absorbed through the atmosphere. Basically, that's a simple way to explain it. But if we talk about in more technical terms, so our sensors basically measure emissions as they are backscattered from the Earth, and then it spectrally decomposes it, and we're able to detect and quantify the methane, the volume of methane in the atmosphere relative to the background. And we use a wide-angle fabric perospectrometer. So and this instrument has a field of view of 12 kilometers by 12 kilometers with spatial resolution of 25 by 25 meters. So what does this really mean for methane emissions? It means that for the very first time, because this was not done before, for the very first time, we can detect methane emissions from space at a facility level. Being able to go down to 25 meters by 25 meters means that we can tell within a facility boundary where emissions are coming from. And that's really important. Because before now, what you need to do was to get sensors mounted all around a facility or use optical gas imagers drive around in mobile vehicles looking for methane emissions. But we can now, from space, find these emissions. Now, imagine the kilometers upon kilometers of pipelines crisscrossing Canada, for example, or even the United States. It's impractical to monitor these pipelines. You need another solution that can do this from space, and that's where satellites come into play. So it's revolutionary. It's a very important technology that we need today in this fight against climate change, and we're very, very proud at GHGSat that we'll be able to develop this technology, which is working. Clients are using it, and it's helping towards mitigating methane emissions.
Yeah, right on. And so you had mentioned pipelines, obviously 25 by 25 meters. We are talking about larger facilities. So for the benefit of our listeners, can you just share what some of those other facility types that you might be targeting that meet that size and also are known to have methane emissions?
Absolutely. So we'd have gas gathering facilities. We have LNG processing facilities. And we also have landfills. Landfills are some of the facilities as well that we monitor methane emissions at. We also have coal mines. Coal mines, we have industrial facilities like steel manufacturing plants, cement manufacturing plants. So those are some of the facilities that we monitor methane at.
Wonderful. And, not to steal your thunder, but one of the things that excites me about the technology is it's a sort of one size fits all. You can apply your satellite, it's out there in orbit, and it can look at any one of those facilities and determine the methane emissions. So very, very exciting. So why is satellite GHG detection and quantification an exciting opportunity for Canada, Alberta, and the world? And what is novel about GHGSat's approach to innovating in this space? No pun intended.
No, that's beautiful. So it was not possible before to measure from space emissions at these facilities at the scale we're doing right now. That is in itself a revolutionary finding that we are really proud of at GHGSat. And the reason that's really important is that the world is racing against climate disaster, right? And we can see some of the pronouncements at the last COP28, the world coming together to actually do something about methane emissions. And that's because we now know that this is important. And we now know that we need to find revolutionary ways, new technologies that can address this at scale in ways that have not been done before. GHGSat is the first company globally to do this. I think the ability to detect from space, I think that is the big win for the technology.
I think maybe one point I would make is it's amazing to have a tool that you can quickly pull up at that very high resolution you mentioned, a map of the world. And I think you folks have that website published live for everyone to look at, where you can see in real time or semi-real time the methane emissions that are out there. And then from there, your customers can go in at a facility level, identify the worst performers or the ones with the biggest methane emissions, and then dive in with more specific and targeted measures to further quantify and then remediate those emissions. So that's something that really excites us about the technology. Now, moving on to the market and the commercialization efforts that are underway at GHGSat, can you maybe speak to the level to which the technology is being adopted widely, and what markets are you really targeting with the technology?
If you look at oil and gas space, name some of the biggest names in oil and gas, some of the international oil companies and national oil companies. These are our customers here in North America. In the Middle East, we have customers as well. Some of the big names in the Middle East are our customers as well. And if you look at the landfill space, we're making massive inroads in landfills, helping customers in Europe and in the Middle East measure and quantify methane emissions from the landfills. And we're getting into the coal space as well, the coal mine space. And we have seen tremendous growth. And we as a company, we're scaling massively as well. So definitely improving on the technology side. The go-to-market team is growing, and we're doing that because we see how much demand there is for the technology. And we just need those hands to help customers with adopting the technology. So yeah, we have seen success, and it's not just localized in one area, and that's the beauty of having an instrument up in space, because you can basically see anywhere in the world, and that's why the customer base we have is scattered all around the world.
Wonderful. One thing that we're very proud of in Alberta is our successes in reducing our methane emissions and overcoming this great challenge. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to your perspective on Alberta's achievements to date in this area and how you see, GHGSat's part of that story.
I think Alberta has done a fantastic job in driving down emissions. Now, we know that Alberta has an outsized contribution in the oil and gas space in Canada, and also has an outsized contribution to emissions in Canada. And because we understand that, I think the government has done well with the regulations in place to ensure that operators are doing what they need to do to bring down emissions. And I was looking at a report today, looking at from 2014 levels, methane emissions has been driven down by 45% from 2014 levels. So that speaks to the success of some of the regulatory frameworks that the government has put into place. And I think it also speaks to the efforts like what ERA is doing, basically helping fund organizations that are coming up with technologies to help drive down methane emissions in Alberta. And I just think that the direction the province is going, and some of the things that I have heard, it speaks to the will to do more. And technologies like GHGSat's technology and others as well, which are in the pipeline at ERA, I think they will continue to help to bring these emissions down.
Yeah, I love that answer. I do agree with you that there's been some tremendous strides made. At ERA, we're very proud of our methane investments, and I think we have seen some very exciting technologies come through, both on the quantification and measurement side, like your technology. And of course, I won't claim credit for this, but I once heard someone say you can't manage what you can't measure, right? And so that's
Absolutely.
where technologies like yours are so important. We've also seen a lot of success in the mitigation technologies that once someone uses your solution to find out where the methane is, we can go in and remediate it with various technologies. So both pieces are extremely important.
Absolutely.
What I would like to do now is maybe dig into a bit of the history and, of course, chat a bit about the funded project between ERA and GHGSat. So I'll start with, compared to today, if you can take us back to when this relationship began, where was GHGSat from an organizational and technical perspective when you first partnered with us back in 2017?
Oh, GHGSat was in its nascent stages, right? It was a startup, I would say, which we're proud to say today we're no longer a startup, we're now a scale-up. But at the time that we partnered with ERA, we're definitely a small organization. We had no presence in Alberta, no office in Calgary, but today we have an office here in Calgary. In fact, the airborne team is based here. So our technology can be mounted on satellites. It can also be mounted on aircrafts to fly over facilities. So the team that does that aircraft side of things is based here in Calgary. So that tells you how the organization has grown. And at the time, we did not have any satellites up in space, but now we actually do. We had our demonstration satellite, but now we have 12 satellites in space. So that tells you the pace of growth. Just last year, we launched 6 satellites, right? And our first CO2 satellite went up in space as well last year. So that tells you how far we've come from when we partnered with ERA.
Yeah, it's amazing to see the advancement, and of course we're very pleased to see the Alberta presence that was created as part of the project, and very happy to see that continuing on as an important part of the GHGSat company as a whole. Maybe we'll just dial in a little bit on what you said about that ERA-funded project, and I do love knowing that that first satellite that we funded is up there still and is one of those 12 in the constellation, if I'm not mistaken. But maybe just take us a little bit more into the details of that particular project, what specifically ERA funds were used to achieve, and what the outcomes of that investment were.
We successfully undertook and completed the project with ERA support, and that project was for the development and first of a kind commercial implementation of our first generation satellites and aircraft hybrid system, which was used for the detection, measurement, and quantification of methane emissions. So, under this project, our first commercial methane sensing satellite, C1, we name our satellites over our children. So this is named Iris. And it was launched in September of 2020. And it achieved its operational target of detection threshold of 100 kilogram of methane per hour. And we also had the aircraft variant, which is GHGSat AV1, which had initial test flight in December of 2019. And it was commissioned for commercial operations in the summer of 2020. And it did achieve a detection threshold of 10 kilogram of methane per hour. So this is success, right? This is success for us. And the partnership with ERA enabled us in this journey to achieve some of these things that we achieved.
Yeah, wonderful. And I'll just put in a shameless plug that I think we'll have our public final outcomes report from that project posted to our website, hopefully around the same time as this podcast episode goes up. So if folks are curious about learning more about what happened in that project and the great outcomes from it, you can have some reading material for you up there on the Emissions Reduction Alberta website.
Sweet. And I can also add that some of the sites that we use for the tests, tailings ponds, conventional well sites, were all based in Alberta as well. So it was really an Alberta focused test project.
Amazing. Well, maybe let's dig in a little bit on that, and you can tell us about why did you focus on Alberta for that stage of testing and demonstration? Why was Alberta the right place to invest in this technology and take that next step towards commercialization?
For one, we know that Alberta is thinking of ways to drive down emissions. And we also know that we have the presence of the facilities where we can test and demonstrate the applicability of our technology for emissions reduction. So it was a no-brainer, right? Just looking around Canada, it was a no-brainer to know that Alberta is the right place to do it. And also we have enablers, the ERA as well, being an enabler to encourage organizations to try and come up with technologies to reduce emissions. I think that as well was another reason that we thought that Alberta would be a good place to start. And looking back now, it was a good decision to do that.
Absolutely. And I'll have to say, I think it's really interesting. Of course, there was so many sites in Alberta that you were able to look at with the technology, but it's certainly a first of kind, a first and only for ERA, where the actual pilot sites were, of course, within the province, but the technology itself was not, unless you count being in orbit thousands of kilometers up as being in the province. So it's really interesting from that perspective. Maybe if you can just speak to the impact of ERA's funding on your commercial growth and development as an organization. We know that you've had a tremendous amount of success as an organization in your commercialization, in your fundraising. I know you recently closed another fundraising round. So if you can just speak to ERA's role and how we helped lay the foundation for all the great things that have come since.
Chris, this is a very important topic and one that's really dear to my heart. It's important to highlight the challenges that startups face in raising capital. In fact, many, many bright ideas are killed because they lack access to capital, right? So we have to be innovative if we have to solve some of the daunting challenges that we face today, especially climate challenges. And to do that, we need capital, an immense amount of capital. And I must say that the work that ERA is doing to enable these companies by providing them access to capital early on, I think it's fantastic. I must applaud the team. I think you all should keep doing what you're doing. It is not just work you're doing for today, it's work you're doing for the future. So I applaud the government. I applaud the entire team for doing it. I encourage you guys to keep doing it. I think early on in our journey, having access to capital from ERA was one of the things that propelled us to the success that we've received today. And like you alluded, without that initial capital, you might not be able to prove your technology. If you can't prove your technology, you might not be able to raise further capital, and before you know it, the technology is dead. But because we're able to prove our technology, investors saw it, and we have been successful in raising capital. I think so far since inception, we have raised over 126 million US dollars. And you were right. Last year, late last year, we raised our Series C1, about 44 million US dollars. And that's because investors see the potential of the technology. They see the future. They know that it has a potential to scale and solve meaningful problem.
That's so great. We absolutely love to see when our early dollars are followed by such a great showing of support from the private and venture community. So congratulations on all the great fundraising successes. Industrial scale carbon capture. North America's first hydrogen-powered locomotives. Using drones for reforestation. Since 2009, Emissions Reduction Alberta has been helping to deliver on the province's environmental and economic goals by investing in projects just like these. Projects that pilot, demonstrate, and deploy clean technologies across our industries. Whether it's detecting methane from space, producing biogas from Alberta's agriculture industry, or one of almost 300 other projects in our portfolio, ERA's investments in these game-changing technologies are reducing emissions, lowering costs, attracting investment, and creating jobs right here in Alberta. ERA's funding is sourced from the Government of Alberta through the Technology Innovation and Emissions Reduction, or TIER, Fund, which is Alberta's provincial industrial carbon price. For more information about Emissions Reduction Alberta, visit eralberta.ca. We've spoken a little bit about how you've scaled your fleet of satellites from one pilot unit to the first commercial that we helped you launch, all the way up to 12 that are now in orbit, including your first CO2 satellite, if I heard correctly earlier. Can you just give us a bit more detail on what that growth trajectory has looked like, both in terms of units, in terms of customers, in terms of your organization size, and what that overall journey towards commercialization has looked like?
Oh, absolutely. So, in terms of the volume of methane emissions that we have taken, we last year alone measured about 319 million tons of methane emissions worldwide. So that is equivalent to 71 million gasoline-powered cars driven on the road for a year. You know, I'm going to pause so that number can sink in. It's a lot. It's a lot, right? And that just tells you how we've been able to move on and move along. And now we have 12 satellites in space, including the first CO2 satellite. That was not possible. In fact, just last year, we launched 6 satellites. And for 2024, we have plans to launch even more satellites. So the company is growing, and we have plans to scale at a very fast pace, and we're doing everything that we need to do to get there. And we're also working on our next generation technology. So right now, we're working on our generation 2 technologies, and what that is supposed to do is to lower detection thresholds, and we're building our analytics capacity tremendously, looking at things like machine learning and AI to speed up attribution of detected methane to facilities and to improve turnaround time, all these things that we're doing. But it's been a good journey, and we've also scaled our customer base, right? We've gone from oil and gas facilities alone. Now we're talking about landfills, coal mines, and these are the facilities as well. We've scaled our geographic location. We've moved beyond North America, Canada, and the US. We've gone to the Middle East, to Europe, and we're partnering with organizations like the ESA, the European Space Agency. We're delivering data to the IMEO, the International Methane Emissions Observatory from the UNEP. So it's been a massive growth phase for us, and getting a lot of attention, and we will keep going in this direction.
Truly amazing. So I guess it's fair to say that your first product is now can be considered commercialized, but there's always more steps in that commercialization journey when it comes to integrating new technologies and continuing to expand to new markets. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. We're definitely very commercial at the moment, but yeah, we're not resting on our laurels. We're thinking, we're innovating. That's the reason we got here in the first place. So we cannot be complacent. We have to keep thinking of new ways to improve the things that we do today, and that's exactly what the team is doing. And our CEO and founder, Stefan Germain, he's very, very, very intentional about this when he speaks to the team about it. He encourages and challenges the team to think outside the box, to come up with new ideas and innovative ways to do the things we do today. Because within this space, you need innovation to thrive. You need innovation to solve the challenge that faces us today. It's huge. It's a massive challenge, and we need to do things unusually to be able to address these challenges.
Yeah, I can vouch for Stefan's innovative attitude as well. Back when he and I were working on the project together, always a pleasure to work with him, and of course the rest of the GHGSat team. So certainly a great culture of innovation at your organization. Now we've had a few stats from you, and the numbers are incredibly impressive. So just exponential growth in the number of satellites, doubling in the last year. It sounds like about doubling the quantity of emissions you've detected since 2022, and that was after already increasing it substantially from 2021. So can you just speak to that pace of growth, how big of an achievement it is, and what the projections look like going forward to the future? What are you aiming for in terms of future volumes that you're able to quantify and enable people to address?
So for the future, at COP28, we made a commitment, right? So Stefan said that and announced our plans to measure methane and CO2 emissions at every major industrial site every day by 2026. That's it. Wow. That's the commitment we have made. So if you're talking about how we intend to grow our measurement capacity and the volume of CO2 that we measure, it is exponential, right? Because as we grow our constellation, it's not a linear growth in the facilities we're able to measure or the number of detections we're able to make a day. It's an exponential growth. So look at those numbers doubling. Just imagine them quadrupling and even beyond that. That's what we're looking at. And going through every facility by 2026, that's where we want to be. And we're doing all we can to get there.
So nothing short of daily measurement of emissions from every major industrial facility on the planet. That's quite ambitious, and we wish you the best of luck. That's incredibly exciting. Now we've mainly been speaking about the volumes and quantities of emissions that you've been able to detect with your technology up to this point. What I would love to do is, as we mentioned, you can't manage what we can't measure. So we've done the measurement part. You're doing amazing work on that front. Can you just maybe speak to how that translates to management of those emissions and what you expect in terms of your technology's ability to enable greenhouse gas reductions and cost savings for your customers?
Right. So what we're doing basically is enabling customers to detect emissions that would otherwise have gone undetected. Right. So that not only helps them keep the gas in the pipeline, for example, it also helps them act fast in a time frame that would have been impossible a few years ago when they had to do measurements in intervals using optical gas imagers. So that's the plus. And with analytics that we're introducing right now, the turnaround time for customers to get these results will even improve further. So that means they will be able to get actionable data quicker, which helps them address these emissions even quicker, right? So that's where we're going. That's the plan that we have. And as organizations have made commitments towards their 2030 goals, right, they need partners like us who gives them the data they need to show that they're actually taking the actions that they need to meet their 2030 objectives and most net zero by 2050. So we are that partner to most of these organizations.
Yeah, I think you've hit on two parts that are really important and often go underappreciated in this conversation. The first one being, certainly with manual surveys, you can go out and find some of these emissions, but even if it's something as simple as a leaking valve that would take very little time and effort to fix, if you discover it only after 6 months and it's been leaking methane for that long, you've already had a huge emissions impact, even if you're able to quickly fix it. So the fact that your technology reduces the cost and dramatically increases the response time to be able to make that sort of quick fix, that's where some of these tremendous benefits come from. And then, like I said, you've hit on a second really important piece, I think, which is the being able to quantify and clearly report, whether it's to regulators or to carbon markets, on the emissions reductions that have been achieved. That's something that up to date has been somewhat of an art more than a science, and so I guess the real promise of these sort of technologies is to be able to have that firm quantifiable baseline that's based on a dependable source, and so I think that's really important and a huge benefit of the technology. So thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely.
All right. I'd like to dig a little bit into, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. We know space is hard, and we know methane is hard, and so, boy, oh boy, detecting methane from space must be really hard. So I'd love it if you could share some of the challenges that you faced in the project and in your subsequent commercialization, and some of the things that you've learned along the way of this commercialization journey.
So you're right. Space is hard. A lot of factors play into ensuring that we get the quality of data that we intend to get. And cloud cover, for example, is one thing that affects our ability to detect methane emissions, right? And in certain parts of the world that have very persistent cloud cover, it's still a challenge to be able to detect emissions in those parts of the world. And at certain latitudes as well, it's also a challenge to be able to detect based on the sun angle. It's always a challenge to detect methane emissions. And you also have certain areas of the world that could be very dusty. In say, the desert regions of the world, those aerosol particles impede our ability to detect emissions. But these are known challenges that the entire industry is working to address. And based on the brain power, being thrown at these challenges, I am optimistic that as a collective, we will find ways to overcome some of these challenges in the future.
I can tell you on the bingo card of reasons why some of our projects have been delayed. Delays in the rocket being ready to launch is I think a one-off that we saw that we probably won't see again. So that's definitely one of the unique attributes of this project as well. I'd also love to chat about some of the systemic challenges that are facing the overall field of methane quantification and measurement, whether that's within Alberta, within Canada, or more broadly. Can you maybe speak to some of the systemic challenges that you're facing, whether it's regulatory, markets, or anything else?
Oh, absolutely. Regulators do a good job of coming up with a framework and then opening it to the public for comment period, so we can, at least voice our opinions on certain aspects of those regulations. But regulators have certain things that they want to achieve, right? They have certain targets that they need to achieve, and the targets that need to be achieved help drive the regulations, right? So it's a dynamic space. It's an ongoing space of ongoing conversation between technology providers, between the regulators, and that's a space that we navigate, and we try to ensure that we're playing our part in helping the regulators come up with the best approach to ensuring that we achieve the targets that the government intends to achieve.
Yeah, I really like that approach of targets are only as good as the technologies that we have to achieve them. And oftentimes it's the technology that moves ahead first, and the regulations and targets are moving to catch up. So it's great to see, the more, for example, methane quantification technologies like this that we can add to the toolbox, the more we're going to be able to have effective regulation and meet our targets in a way that's cost effective but also timely. So I think that's a really great way to think about it. Can you maybe speak to, in the future, how you see your technology providing benefits to customers that are trying to navigate this space and help them overcome some of these systemic problems that we've talked about?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even today, right? We're already seeing that customers are approaching us and they're saying that we need to keep an eye on this area, our facilities, right? That's happening already today. And based on some of the commitments that customers have made with their emissions reduction targets, we only see that increasing. That is it's gonna get louder. The call to be able to show verifiable data based on some of the frameworks that are coming up. We've seen the OGMP 2.0, which is a framework that most organizations in the oil and gas space are aspiring towards become gold standard. They need verifiable data to be able to overcome some of those systemic, data accuracy challenges, and we provide that today. And as our algorithms even get better and better, we will provide even higher and higher quality data to these organizations in the future.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. I suspect most of our listeners on the podcast will have some understanding of the complexity and the challenges of, for example, carbon markets, where, like you say, the accuracy, the verifiability, and overall the quality of the data that goes into the emissions reduction estimates is of paramount importance for the quality of the credit or whatever sort of incentive that would be generated for the emissions reduction. And so, it's really exciting to think about a technology like this, where I think when we get to the point where you're having someone check on you from orbit daily to verify that those reductions are happening, I think carbon markets will be able to have a lot more confidence that they're paying for real and verifiable reductions. So it's a really, really exciting development.
Absolutely.
Now, earlier you've touched on the next stage for you, which is moving beyond methane and into the other big greenhouse gas that most people have heard of, which is CO2, just to be clear. Can you maybe speak to what that next step in the journey has looked like and where you're going from here on the CO2 detection side of things?
Yeah, so we were so proud, last year to launch our CO2 sensor. So it's up in space, going through commissioning at the moment, but we are hoping and looking forward to start getting those CO2 measurements at industrial facilities around the world. And we think it's important because CO2 is abundant. So it's a different scale, right? We're talking about tons instead of kilograms. It's a whole different scale here. But what it does for us, right, is that it helps operators quantify the CO2, because right now, basically, these are calculations based on mass balance, but now you're going to have verifiable and quantifiable data based on the emissions from your smokestacks and from your facilities. So it's a journey that we are embarking on. We're very proud to be the very first company to have CO2 satellites in orbit. And it's the first. It's definitely not going to be the last. We just need to test and prove the concept and the measurements, and then I think it's go from here, for sure.
Wow, very exciting. And so with that, is there anything else you want to say about that next step for you and how you expect your global reach to continue to grow, as well as the impact of the technology?
Absolutely. So we talked about how we've expanded beyond North America, and now we've expanded into Europe and the Middle East. We do expect that growth to continue. And we're building the team out in the Middle East, hiring folks and a good market team, and we're building out our analytics center in the UK as we speak. So we're hiring analytics experts in the UK, creating a center of excellence out there in the UK. And we also see more and more client base, right? We're no longer focused on oil and gas. We're getting customers in the landfill sector, in the coal mine sector. We're expecting to get customers in industrial sector, steel, cement, and we have customers in the financial services. I think that's one area as well that we need to mention, because investors need to know that the claims companies are making are actually verifiable, and we provide the data, emissions data, for companies to verify ESG claims. So that's one big portion for us to push into the financial services sector, and we see that space growing. I think it's going to be a very important part of our portfolio going into the future. And in terms of impact, we're no longer doing estimates. We're no longer making back of the napkin calculations. These are verifiable measurements, right, that we're taking every day. So that there shows a quantifiable impact. You basically can tell, like we talked earlier, 71 million cars taken off the road a year, driving on the road for a year. That's huge. What this does is that it reduces the amount of CO2 or methane in the atmosphere. That has the effect to help lower global warming. Hopefully we can achieve 1.5 degrees C, which is where the world wants to go. Efforts like this are what we need, and many more. But this is definitely one of the efforts that we need to get the world to the point where we need to go in terms of achieving our climate objectives.
Couldn't agree more, and what a great note to end on. I guess that brings us to the end of the questions that I had for you, but I thought I'd just give you a chance if there's any other exciting ventures or initiatives from GHGSat that you wanted to bring to the attention of our audience, or really anything else that you wanted to share before we close for today.
No, thank you, Chris. One word I want to put out there is that the world needs innovative technologies. The world is in a very tough spot in our drive to bring down global warming and achieve 1.5 degrees C. GHGSat is doing its part, right? And we're hoping that organizations, governments, regulatory agencies will come together. So this has to be all hands on deck. Everyone needs to do their part in this work, in this journey towards reducing global warming and hopefully achieving 1.5 degrees C.
Thank you so much, Stanley, and we're very excited and proud to see all the great work that you and GHGSat have done over the years, and we'll continue to be a great advocate and supporter for you going forward. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support Carbon Copy, please follow, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also visit eralberta.ca to sign up to our newsletter and catch all the latest from Emissions Reduction Alberta. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.